conservative, especially Christian conservative worldview will always be more successful than a neoliberal worldview from a philosophical perspective, and this cannot be disputed. It simply cannot. This is why you do not see Christian morale being used to subvert, because it cannot subvert. It can only cleanse. It can only free in the true sense a society. That's why whenever there is some type of Christianity pushed on society, it's some faulty version. You know, it's some type of blasphemous version of Christianity. You know, false Christianity, religion of man type of Christianity, not the true Christian worldview of Christ. So this is what we see here. This idea of selling freedom, and the art is how they sold it. The American philosophical dominance. The free, the brave, and the sexy. This has always been sold as an American thing, to be free, to be brave, and of course to be sexy. Sex has always been sold in a way that is unique to the American. And of course they want to achieve worldwide admiration and support. And to do this, cultural propaganda was used. A campaign was formed by way of the Congress for Cultural Freedom. It started in Berlin in 1950, mainly out of Berlin and Paris. Those were pretty much the home bases of this organization. And it was under the CIA, also known as the Ministry of Culture. So in the book 1984, which the Congress of Cultural Freedom actually had a lot to do with the film 1984, okay, with the funding for 1984, as well as Animal Farm. Okay, so this is just an example of how they picked certain films to promote. Now, the reason they would promote things like 1984, this more Orwellian perspective, because when you watch 1984, it has a very communistic type of spin, and they were trying to push this anti-communism thing, because communism was used as a way to say, look at this authoritarian regime, this is bad, you need to be free, you need to be running wild, satisfying your deepest desires and letting your loins run free and liberated. Communism is just going to hold you back and keep you structured and force you into a lifestyle that you don't want to live, and it won't allow you the true freedom to find your true self and find your true consciousness and all this madness. So this is why they promoted something like 1984, and this is exactly why they did not so much promote the idea of Huxley's Brave New World, because I would say, though we are seeing some Orwellian newspeak and censorship by way of this Google Ministry of Truth, I would say society today is very much so this brave new world. We're definitely experiencing a brave new world where sex and desire satisfaction, drugs, these types of things are ruling the society and are forming our perspectives. We have much less of an Orwellian overall. We're much less Orwellian than we are Huxleyan. It's interesting to me how they did not promote a whole lot of the Huxleyan perspective, because the Huxleyan perspective is actually their goal. So they're not going to promote their goal. They're going to promote what they want you to fight against. But it's always a red herring. It's always a misguiding diversion to keep you from finding out the real truth. Because what they want to do is sell you desire, sell you freedom, because they know they're going to control the things that you need to feel free. And those come in entertainment. Those come in sexual pleasure industries. It comes in food, it comes in advertisement and commodities, consumerism, these types of things. This is how we got where we're at today, by way of this type of manipulation, by way of art, because at this time there was a lot less industry, a lot less media, a lot less of all of these this type of social engineering apparatuses that we have today. A lot of this stuff didn't exist then. So they were able to really shape our minds very easily, and it opened up the doors for where we're at today. This is why we see the Katy Perrys. This is why we see the Ariana Grandes, and we see all of these twisted and subverted characters of depravity just put into the limelight and mobilizing the younger culture and taking over the mainstream. We could look at the Frankfurt School, we could look at Operation Paperclip, we could look at all of these things. There's always this aspect of intellectuals. Look at the think tanks, right? They're like artistic intellectuals who always tend to be atheists, okay, into scientism, secular humanists, or New Agers. You very rarely find Christian morality anywhere in the artistic intellectual circles. And these are the people who control culture and have always controlled culture. And they play this anti-Russian thing, this anti-communism thing as a ploy to take up arms and join their fight and buy into their philosophy. It was in goals of creating a superiority of the Western democracy. If you remember, Obama and both Bushes always spoke about democracy. Oh, well, some key figures in the Congress for Cultural Freedom, there's tons of them, but I just picked out a few. Julian Huxley, the infamous Arthur Koestler, John Steinbeck, okay, and guess who were presidents of the Congress for Cultural Freedom? Well, the infamous socialist Fabian Bertrand Russell. And of course, another one of the presidents was John Dewey, the father of modern education. John Dewey, the promoter of the Prussian model compulsive education system that we find today, and the mind control system of education that the American institutes teach our society. John Dewey. Okay, so we see who's part of this. What do they have to do with art? Well, the thing is, this had nothing to do with art. This had all to do with cultural subversion. But art was understood, and even Plato was very familiar with this. Art was always understood as something spiritually, metaphysically, psychologically powerful. And when geared in a certain fashion, certain information is put into this art, it will change complete societies. And if you've noticed, since this time, everywhere on the planet has been Americanized to some extent. This is how it started. They did it with art. And the Congress of Cultural Freedom was an actual organization that was funded by the CIA to do this. Now, what we're taught, what we learn in these books, like Francis Saunders and others, is that they were exposed by Ramparts magazine in 1967, I believe was the year they were actually exposed as CIA props. And allegedly, the whole organization, CCF, was broken up and they were no more. This reminds me of the 1973 BS we're told of the MK Ultra program. You know, it was exposed and it broke up and it was no longer active. Well, that's a bunch of nonsense, because we see the same methods repeated over time, even in our modern media, in our academic system. So I don't buy that for a second. But that's what they tell us. So yeah, Gloria Steinem was definitely a part of this. The CIA's most important impact was it made us unafraid to go ahead and do what we thought was right. She quotes, she was sat on the board of directors of the Independent Research Services, CIA. She says the CIA, it decreased, not diminished, our freedom of action. So what we see here is the CIA is using certain individuals. It seems like, well, we know for a fact that the CIA has used these types of individuals and let them influence the youth. So we could look at Gloria Steinem here, cultural influencer. She was actually assigned her own personal case officer and sponsored by the agency to attend the youth festivals worldwide, amongst other 250 student influencers. So they would get these young people, these liberal, neoliberal actually, young leftists, and they would put them all over the world and they would have them educate children and youth. This was the late 50s and into the 60s. This was a way to globalize neoliberal perspectives and the neoliberal worldview. And this reminds me of what we see today with celebrities being part of NGOs, non-governmental organizations like ambassadors and so forth for like UNICEF and UNESCO. They've been doing this for a very long time. That's why I would say this committee, Cultural Freedom, it still exists. It may not exist under that name, but the CIA has probably several types of these organizations. Yeah, so this whole idea of Soviet infiltration was employed to create a global cultural Trojan horse program to subvert culture internationally. This is my perspective. They want to paint this picture that we're fighting against Russia and communism, but it's not necessarily the case. Maybe on a lower level, maybe on the lower ranks, there's infighting and competition and things like this. But at the top, it's all a multipolar, technocratic oligarchy that use art and leftism and neoliberal perspectives to subvert society and culture, to make them easy to control. Yeah, and even Nelson Rockefeller Cold War strategist at the time, of course. Okay, so the Rockefellers have always been behind all of this stuff. Nelson Rockefeller replaced C.D. Jackson as the Cold War strategist. So, and the Rockefeller family funded the Cultural Freedom Committee. All right, so, and as well as the Ford Foundation. So it's the same players, the usual suspects. But this is just a part of history that isn't talked about too often. So it's important to know about the CCF, because we have evidence now to prove that not just the CIA, but the American government, along with other international governments, work together to fund art in a way that would subvert culture and create culture. We have evidence for this. Isn't it interesting? We're just on a trajectory, guys. We are on this path that we've been on, and we're given all of these dialectics. You know, we're given North Korea as a boogeyman. We're given Trump as an authoritarian bad guy. We're given big bad Russia as the robots that are, you know, messing up with our democracy. You know, when we got guys like Henry Kissinger who are just pulling strings, of course, under others that are pulling his strings. But overall, it's just a long path of so-called alleged pseudo-power that gives us these different perspectives of reality. But we're just on the same trajectory to technocracy. This is the goal, technocracy. And it's all bipartisan, that's the thing. There's no left, there is no right. It's all about values. What you believe in is really what it comes down to. It's God against the world. That's really what we're dealing with here at the end of the day. We can talk politics, you know, until our eyes and ears fall off, but it's all about God versus the world.